Hey gang, hope everyone's having a good summer. Got a repair to do over the next few days and I thought I'd share it with you. This is an Avalon guitar, which is interesting. Don't see very many of those around here. Avalon is actually a guitar manufacturer that's headquartered in Northern Ireland. This is an Avalon Silver Series though, and the Silver Series was manufactured for them in Korea for a couple of years in the early 2000s. This is made in 2003. And despite being a Korean-made guitar, it's got some really interesting features. It's a gigantic box. It's a full 16 inches across, and it's basically like an OM guitar that's been scaled up sort of to the scale of a dreadnought. It's thick. It's a full 5 inches thick at the butt end. It's also got some appointments that you can tell they had some design features that they really wanted upheld. Around the sound hole here, it's very softly radius, which is something you don't normally see in a factory-made guitar. The top is beautiful. It's a nice piece of really well quartered Sitka spruce. Back and sides are, they were probably marketed as mahogany, but that looks like Spanish cedar to me. These are laminated. It's a solid top. This guitar also has a nitrocellulose lacquer finish, which is really rare for a recent Asian import. And the reason it's in the shop, I've done some other work for the player, and a couple of years ago he showed me this guitar and said, hey, is there anything we could do about this? It's got a lot of cracking in the soundboard. And I looked at it and I said, you really ought to think about it, because this is not a tremendously expensive guitar, and by the time I do this repair it might be equal to its current value. So maybe you want to go and buy a new one instead. But he came back to me a while later and said, I tried a bunch of different ones, and no, this is the one for me. Like the tone, love the playability, like the sound, and it's obviously got a lot of sentimental value to him. And so in some ways you can't really put a price on that. He wants it fixed, and yes, I'll do my best to fix it for him. This guitar has lots of cracking on the soundboard. He's the kind of player who plays hard and puts it away wet, as it were. So it's sustained quite a lot of battle damage over the years. He's a professional musician. See down here at the butt end, it's actually, the top has come away from the tail block in this area. There's some sinking in front of the bridge and a little bit of bellying behind it. See, there's a big crack here that's being held together by the pickguard. The funny thing is, despite all of this damage, there's absolutely no buzzing when you play it. Now it's a little bit muted, it sounds a little fuzzy, but it doesn't sound like it's actually buzzing, which is kind of weird. I think I've discovered why there's no buzzing, actually. This is interesting. The X-brace, this has actually got a double X-brace top, like some Gibsons did, 1970s Gibsons. Two intersecting X's. All of the major arms of the X-brace, this is the upper bout, you can see have come away from the top of the guitar. It looks like they have busted out the lining on the edges. They may not have been in there very deeply. So it's loose, and you know what, if the braces aren't touching the top, there's no chance for it to buzz. So this repair, I was assuming there was going to be a lot of cleats on the inside. Just probing around in here, looking at the extent of the loose braces, I think I'm going to have to take the back off on this one, which is, it's a little tricky, but, if we really want to stitch this thing together and make sure it all holds, I think that's probably the best way to go. Just starting off by cleaning the frets on this guitar and the fretboard, just because, yeah. Now I'm doing a sort of cursory cleaning of the body, just to sort of see where the cracks go. I'm not taking the tape off, I'm working around it, but just to get some of the grunge off. I'm using the old Ronsonol lighter fluid, which is the only one I've ever used for this job. Works well, doesn't affect the finishes, and it's a good solvent. Flashes off quickly, doesn't wet the wood, doesn't get down into the cracks. One thing to be wary of is if you've got an open crack, you don't really want to be pushing a whole lot of sweat and grunge and oils down into it. Most of these have been around for a long time and they will have, sweat in them. So I'm using the lighter fluid on the more solid areas and just sort of basic cleaning here. That's all. So I've just been thinking about the order of operations here, and I've decided to lock down the outline of the guitar by gluing the top back onto the sides here at the base and the lower bout. That way, when I cut through the binding on the back and take it off, it's less likely to spring out of shape. I'll have the outline established here, and it's not going to be deformed when I glue it back together. To do that, I'm going to be using the traditional violin maker's spool clamps to draw the side back into alignment and clamp it down. Here's a quick tip. When I was first starting out, I need a lot of these, and I decided to make them out of threaded rod, which is inexpensive. And in order to protect the guitar sides, I slip a plastic drinking straw. I make a slit in it, and that fits perfectly over the 1/4-20 threaded rod and protects it. Protects the sides of the guitar from getting marred up by all those threads. To gain access to the back and side joint, I'm using my old school laminate trimmer router setup here, just to route through the binding. This is the one that it registers against the side of the instrument, and there's a very small contact landing point that hits the back, so it's not affected by the radius that's on the back, and it doesn't tilt back and forth. The binding on this guitar is very similar in color to the back and sides. I think it's the same material. It looks like Spanish cedar. Very soft, routes pretty quickly and easily. I'll come back after I've reinstalled the back and I'll cut it deeper into full depth and make sure it's good and clean. At this point I'm just trying to get enough off that I can gain access to the joint between the back and the kerfing. In tricky areas I'll use a scalpel blade, and I can see there's a little line here between the top material and the side or the lining, and I can usually find that with the scalpel and get right down in there, basically poke it through and use it almost like a punch. So got that off pretty cleanly. Especially for a laminated back, you oftentimes lose like the top layer of veneer. You can see little bits of it are left on the block here, that kind of stuff. But it came off pretty clean. And we get a good look at the interior. This is the double X brace pattern. And you can see we've got these braces here and here. This one here's loose. And you can see that these are tucked in over top of each other. I think this instrument took a pretty solid hit on the soundboard. And if it didn't have laminated sides, it would probably have broken up completely. But I guess they absorbed enough shock. This brace here actually has quite a significant crack through. The bracing material is, it's actually quite lightly braced. The height on the X here is just over 1/2 inch, and they're just about 1/4 inch, or a little bit more. So that's very lightly braced for a factory production guitar. You can normally get away with that if you're using really high quality brace material. This stuff is kind of a mismatch. The grain direction is a little bit funny in some of them. Especially this back brace here. looking at it, and it's got some serious run out there. To glue the cracks, I like using this high quality fish glue, which has all the characteristics of hot hide glue, except you can use it cold. And this is a little suction cup that I use to press the glue right down into the crack. It pumps it all the way through to the other side and helps you get perfect penetration. This is a technique that's borrowed from violin restorers. I'll do this a couple of times, put glue on, wipe off the excess, and then I'll be ready to clamp it up. With some glue in the crack, you can see I've got the surface leveled with a couple of plexiglass cawls clamped in place, and I'm also providing a little bit of side-to-side pressure with one of these squeezy quick grip clamps across the low bout. I've got 4 more cracks to do, and then I'll move on to the cleats. For cleats, I'm using some high quality Sitka spruce, which I'll plane down to just over 2 millimeters, and I'll saw into squares. When I glue them on, I'll then carve them so that they're kind of flattened pyramids, which is the traditional shape for these things. The grain runs at an angle about 45 degrees to that of the soundboard for strength. Okay, I'm in the process of re-gluing the braces. You can see that I'm adding these little brackets or tentejones on the end. I've carved away a little bit of the lining. That'll tie the brace into the side in a better way. It's important to clean out between the two surfaces, the brace and the soundboard, before you start gluing, just to get rid of the old glue and make it clean. Depending on how long the brace has been off the top, you can get oxidation, that kind of stuff, or atmospheric contaminants. It'll act like a wax resist and just prevent the glue from sticking the two surfaces together. So after I clean them out with the sandpaper, I'll vacuum the surfaces, and I will get in there with a little moist cloth and clean it up as best I can. To clamp these, I use a padded cork cawl on the outside, and I can reach through the sound hole with my long reach clamps, and also around the back of the side here, using a prop on the outside, or sort of on the inside, to just hold that down in place. And then I'll put the bracket on after that's glued down. It's going good so far. You know, there are some operations that you just don't really feel like filming while they're going on, and replacing a back is one of them. The issue is that you've got a limited amount of time to get things positioned, get the clamps on, and make sure that the binding ledge that you had cut previously is in the right location, equidistant all the way around the guitar, before that glue starts to set. And it's always a bit of a nail biter. But anyway, it's clamped up, seems good, things are looking nice. I checked on the inside of the instrument here, and cleaned up the glue squeeze out around the interior lining, and it looks good. It went back just the way I wanted it to. I'm using my more advanced binding jig here to recut the ledge. None of the Spanish cedar I had on hand was long enough to make the full 32-inch bindings, so I decided to go with some cherry instead, which is approximately the right color. Here I'm just bringing it down to the correct thickness using my scraper jig, and then I'm bending it using my electric bending iron. So we have the back has been replaced and the bindings all installed, and I think that looks okay. The cherry is at least in the same color family as the rest of the guitar, and it's only going to get darker as it ages. Cherry turns quite orange over time, so in a couple of years you probably won't even notice the difference. Turning my attention to the face of the guitar again, there's something to know about taking the back off any guitar is when you replace it, you're bound to have some funny things happening at the body joint. For whatever reason, I guess you release the tension on it, stresses inside, the neck will do some funny things. So I've got a bit of a high fret here at the 14th. I'm going to have to address. I'm going to have to level that with the rest of the frets and recrown it and everything, and then it should be back and ready to put strings on. Okay, so we're all set up and ready to play. And in order to do that, I had to raise the strings slightly on the treble side, not on the bass side. It's just the kind of thing that happens when you get inside a guitar box and re-glue things. You can change the geometry just a little bit, which is enough to make your action adjustments different than they were previously. In order to shim a saddle like this, I like to glue the shim directly to the saddle. I don't like a loose shim because that's, a couple extra layers of surface area that the sound vibration has to travel through before it actually gets to the bridge. So I take either hard maple or rosewood or ebony, glue them directly to the bridge, and then I can plane them down, file them, fine-tune it that way. Just seems like the best idea to me. So what did the repair get us? Definitely more volume. It's loud. And it's also, I think the major change is actually in the character of the sound. It's where previously it was kind of a hesitant sounding guitar, now it's far more assertive, it's richer. It sounds like a big guitar now, where previously it didn't. So it seems to have regained its voice. And the other thing is it's not on the verge of collapse or falling apart or exploding now that it's all back together. I think some people would question whether or not it was worth doing that level of repair to a guitar in this price range. And, I try to be philosophical about that. Because if it was, say, a $4,000 or $5,000 guitar, would you think twice? No, you just do it. And if your criteria is actually the sound of the guitar and it's, something that matches your personality, yes, it doesn't matter if it's an $800 guitar or a $10,000 guitar. You're a musician, you want the sound, it's worth fixing. So that's the mindset I held on to when I entered into the repair. Had a good time doing it, and I hope you enjoyed watching it. So that's it for today. Thanks very much, and we'll see you again.